On a calm and uneventful Thursday evening, May 19, 1983. 27-year-old Diane D.S. was driving along Old Mohawk Road near Springfield, Oregon. Her 3 children, Christy, who was 8 years old, Cheryl, 7, and little Danny, just 3, were sitting quietly in the back seat of her bright red car. The road was dark and nearly deserted, but Diane maneuvered along it with confidence, familiar with every curve and stretch as she made her way forward. Driving alone at night on isolated roads was nothing unusual for Diane, and she felt comfortable and unbothered as she continued on, fully expecting to be home before long. However, the peaceful drive abruptly turned into a nightmare. A dark, indistinct figure suddenly appeared along the roadside. A man with messy, unkempt hair. Diane pulled the car over and stepped outside, whether out of concern or simple curiosity. As she moved closer, the man unexpectedly produced a gun and pointed it at her, demanding that she hand over her car keys. When Diane refused to comply, the encounter spiraled out of control in a matter of seconds. The man advanced toward the vehicle and opened fire, sending bullets into the car where the children sat helplessly inside. Panic took over as Diane tried to react. She pretended to toss her car keys away in an attempt to distract him, hoping to create an opening to escape. In the confusion, however, she was shot in the arm before she could scramble back into the driver's seat. Bleeding but determined, Diane ignored her own injury and raced toward the nearest hospital, driving as fast as she could while screaming for help upon arrival. "Somebody shot my kids," she cried out. Hospital staff immediately rushed to the car, pulling the bloody children from the back seat. 2 were found slumped in the rear while Cheryl, the middle child, was discovered lying motionless on the front floorboard. Despite frantic efforts by nurses and surgeons to save them, it was already too late for Cheryl, Christy, and Danny. One of the children, however, still clung to life. As Diane wrapped her wounded arm with a beach towel to slow the bleeding. Despite the chaos and her own injury, she remained composed enough to place phone calls to her ex-partner and her parents while she waited anxiously for updates from the doctors. When she was informed that Cheryl had died, Diane appeared visibly shaken. Yet, she managed to maintain a sense of outward control. As the hospital worked to treat the surviving children, police began searching for the mysterious gunman who had violently disrupted the community's sense of security. Before long, however, their attention shifted toward Diane herself. Her account of the events contained troubling inconsistencies, and investigators were unsettled by aspects of her behavior and emotional responses. Further scrutiny of Diane's background only deepened their doubts. Born in 1955, she was the oldest of 5 children and had grown up in a rigid, deeply religious household. A past that detectives believed might hold clues to understanding her version of the story. The family relocated often during Diane's childhood, eventually settling in Phoenix, Arizona, where her father secured steady employment with the post office. Life in the household was governed by strict conservative values. That allowed little space for affection, emotional expression, or forgiveness. Feeling constrained and overlooked, Diane began to rebel during her teenage years. She dyed her hair blonde, embraced makeup, and started using her middle name, symbolically distancing herself from the quiet, restrained identity shaped by her upbringing. This transformation brought Diane a new sense of confidence and attention, particularly from her classmates. One person who noticed her immediately was Steve D.S., a fellow student at Moon Valley High School. Despite her parents' strong disapproval, the two grew extremely close and became nearly inseparable. After graduating, Diane enrolled briefly at Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College in California, but she was expelled following multiple affairs. By that point, her relationship with Steve had deteriorated. Yet, it was not over for long. After Diane returned to Arizona, once again defying her parents' wishes, the pair reunited, picking up where they had left off. Diane married Steve on November 13, 1973. When she was only 18 years old. From the very beginning, their marriage was unstable and deeply strained, plagued by Diane's repeated infidelities and Steve's growing sense of suspicion and mistrust. Their first child, Christy, was born in 1974. But any hope that parenthood might stabilize the relationship quickly faded. Not long after Christy's birth, Diane left home to join the Navy. Her time in the military was brief, lasting only 3 weeks. Before she returned, claiming medical problems and expressing concern over Steve's ability to care for their daughter. Rather than improving, their relationship continued to deteriorate, laying the groundwork for an increasingly volatile future. Steve lived in a constant state of anxiety, tormented by the fear that Diane would be unfaithful yet again. What had once been a marriage fueled by young love and optimism devolved into frequent arguments, both behind closed doors and in public. During this turbulent period, Steve purchased a gun for his own sense of security. And in a troubling twist, Diane later gave him both a rifle and a revolver as Christmas gifts, an unsettling detail that would later draw attention. Their second child, Cheryl, was born on January 10, 1976. As financial pressures mounted, Steve decided to undergo a vasectomy, convinced that supporting a family of 4 was the most they could responsibly manage. Despite this, Diane later became pregnant again, a pregnancy that ended in an abortion, an experience she would later claim she deeply regretted. Meanwhile, Diane's continued infidelity placed even greater strain on an already fragile marriage. On December 29, 1979, Diane gave birth to a baby boy named Danny. Though Steve was fully aware that he was not the child's biological father, even with this knowledge, their marriage did not officially end until 1980. Diane frequently insisted that she loved her children. Yet, many people felt her actions contradicted those claims. Christy, Cheryl, and Danny were often seen wearing worn-out clothing, with messy hair and little sign of attentive care. Witnesses also recalled Diane yelling at them and withholding the warmth and affection that young children so desperately needed. Steve came to believe that Diane's neglectful behavior as a mother reflected the same emotional distance and lack of warmth she herself had endured growing up. Her approach to parenting was often deeply concerning. On occasions when she could not find a babysitter, Diane placed the responsibility of caring for her younger siblings on 6-year-old Christy, a burden far too great for a child of that age. Following the divorce, Diane faced ongoing financial difficulties, and despite working for the Postal Service, she sought additional ways to support herself. Eventually, she turned to surrogacy as a means of earning extra income. As part of the surrogacy process, Diane underwent 2 psychiatric evaluations. While the assessments reportedly revealed troubling signs of psychosis and impaired judgment, she was nevertheless approved to proceed and was paid $10,000. In 1982, she gave birth to a baby girl as a surrogate, and the financial reward and sense of accomplishment appeared to fuel her ambitions. Buoyed by this experience, Diane began fantasizing about opening her own surrogacy clinic and even entertained the idea of attending medical school in order to make that vision a reality. In 1981, Diane began a relationship with Robert, a coworker who was already married and struggling with problems in his own marriage. Diane's outspoken and provocative personality quickly drew his interest, and what started as a professional connection soon became an affair. Robert regarded the relationship as strictly physical, but Diane grew emotionally attached and imagined a future with him. He was clear, however, that he had no desire to act as a stepfather and did not want any involvement with her children. At the same time, Steve briefly came back into Diane's life in an attempt to repair their broken marriage. His return led to intense arguments and on at least one occasion, a physical confrontation that left Diane with visible bruises. In spite of the turmoil, Diane remained focused on Robert, even having his name tattooed on her shoulder next to a rose. By the end of 1982, her personal life had grown increasingly chaotic and unstable. She accused Robert of giving her a sexually transmitted infection, which prompted a final breakup and led Robert to confess the affair to his wife. Diane's surrogacy plans were temporarily derailed when a clinic turned her away because of the infection, though she later returned to Kentucky to try again. Around this period, her mobile home mysteriously caught fire while she was away. Diane collected $7,000 from the insurance claim and combined it with her first surrogacy payment to start an unlicensed surrogacy clinic, which ultimately failed. Despite these setbacks, she continued to dream of a future with Robert. In February 1983, Robert drunkenly proposed, prompting Diane to write in her diary, "I could hardly believe my ears today." Robert said he'd live in the same house with my kids and me. That same month, at Robert's apartment, Diane pressured him to choose between her and his wife. Robert chose his wife, which enraged Diane. He left the apartment, calling his wife from a phone booth, and she picked him up to return home. But Diane was not finished. She followed them, pounding on their door and repeatedly ringing their phone throughout the night. Shortly afterward, Diane announced she had secured a job transfer and would be moving to Oregon in April, taking her children with her. Then one day, she and Robert ran into each other at work again. Despite everything, their affair resumed. With only weeks left before her move, Diane stayed with Robert temporarily, and he even got a rose tattoo to match hers. Although he excluded her name, by April, Diane had left Arizona for Oregon, and Robert returned to his wife. Yet her obsession continued. She inundated Robert's home with letters and packages, all of which he returned unopened. Meanwhile, Diane's ex-husband, Steve, noticed that 3 of his firearms were missing. He suspected Diane had taken them, but didn't give it much thought, assuming she needed protection as a single mother relocating to a new state. In May 1983, Diane decided to visit her co-worker Heather with her children, thinking it would be a pleasant outing. On the way home, she claimed she stopped when she saw a man signaling for help. According to her, she stepped out of the car and he demanded her keys. When she refused, gunshots rang out and she rushed to the hospital with her injured children. At first, Cheryl went unnoticed until Diane called out that her daughter was lying on the floor and unresponsive. Medical staff found Cheryl lifeless with 2 gunshot wounds in her back. Attempts to revive her were unsuccessful. She had been dead on arrival. Cheryl was only 7 years old. Christy suffered critical injuries, including a stroke and severe internal damage. 1 bullet remained lodged in her body while another had passed through her chest, collapsing her right lung and causing a hemorrhage in her left. During surgery, Christy's heart stopped, but doctors managed to restart it and stabilize her for further procedures. Danny, awake but terrified, had a bullet wound near his spine and struggled to breathe, requiring chest tubes. Doctors feared he might never walk again. While her children fought for their lives, Diane's behavior drew attention. Hospital receptionist Judy Patterson observed that Diane's injuries were minor compared to the life-threatening wounds her children had sustained. Diane casually washed her arm in the restroom before calling her parents and strangely Robert. When speaking with her mother, Diane recounted the events leading to the shooting, claiming her children had been laughing and talking when a man stopped her and demanded her keys. Later, however, she told police that her children had been asleep at the time. Authorities arrived to investigate and offered to take Diane to the crime scene. As they passed her car, she asked, "I hope my car is okay. Does it have any bullet holes in it?" Diane guided the officers to the scene, recalling only vague details, including what she described as an icky yellow car belonging to the attacker. Yet no such vehicle was found and Diane soon began complaining about the pain in her arm. The police officer called for another officer to escort Diane and her father back to the hospital, while he remained behind to continue searching for evidence. Once back at the hospital, Diane was informed of Cheryl's death and the critical conditions of Christy and Danny. Her reaction was disconcerting. When told that Danny might survive, she remarked, "Do you mean the bullet missed his heart?" Her response left hospital staff and law enforcement baffled. Detectives pulled Diane aside for questioning and observed her calm demeanor, which seemed unnervingly composed for someone whose children had just been violently attacked. They also noted that the wound on Diane's arm appeared consistent with cases where a perpetrator inflicted a self-inflicted injury to deflect suspicion. Diane described the attacker as a white male in his late 20s with dark wavy hair, a stubbly beard, wearing a Levi's jacket and an off-color t-shirt. She also allowed investigators to search her home, where she claimed to own 2 guns. When Diane was finally permitted to see Christy, investigators noticed a striking reaction from the young girl. Her heart rate jumped from 104 to 147 beats per minute as Diane took her hand and repeatedly said, "I love you." Christy appeared terrified. A search of Diane's home uncovered her guns, calendars, and a diary filled with obsessive letters to Robert. Diane's account of the attack shifted slightly. Each time she recounted it with inconsistencies about whether the children were awake or asleep and her own reactions to the shooter. Meanwhile, her ex-husband Steve D.S. flew to Oregon after learning of the incident. Though Danny was not his biological child, he expressed concern for all 3 children. When investigators questioned Steve about Diane's calls on the night of the shooting, he revealed that she had contacted Robert. The detectives went to Arizona to interview Robert, who, with his wife present, detailed his affair with Diane. Both Robert and Steve had alibis, eliminating them as suspects. A forensic scientist examined the bullets and gunpowder residue in Diane's car. The absence of external damage suggested that all 5 bullets hit their intended targets. Blood and gunpowder were found in the back seat and front passenger seat, but none in the driver's seat, pointing toward Diane's probable involvement. Cheryl's funeral was held on May 25, and her ashes were scattered in Arizona. Christy and Danny were stabilized, though their injuries remained severe. Danny was paralyzed from the waist down, while Christy, who had suffered a stroke, lost much of her speech, but showed some improvement through therapy. As the investigation continued, Diane became increasingly defensive. She agreed to another interview, claiming she knew the shooter and that he knew her. However, her responses were vague and repetitive, often ending with, "I don't know." When asked directly whether she had committed the crime, she became angry and stormed out. The most incriminating evidence against Diane ultimately came from her daughter Christy, whose testimony would provide the critical details needed to uncover the truth. On that night, Christy spoke about the abuse she and her siblings had suffered, revealing that Diane had hit them multiple times. She also began to recall the traumatic events of the shooting, though initially she could not name the shooter. A psychologist encouraged Christie to write the name of the person responsible on a piece of paper and then burn it, offering a symbolic way to release her pain. One day, Christie gave the paper to Paula before burning it, on which she had written the words, "My mom." Eventually, Christie revealed the full story. Diane had stopped the car on a dark road, retrieved a handgun from the trunk, and shot her children at close range before shooting herself in the arm to stage the crime. On February 28, 1984, Diane was arrested at her workplace and charged with first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and criminal assault. Adding to the complexity, Diane was pregnant at the time. She initially sought the services of celebrity lawyer Melvin Belli, but he was unavailable. Defense attorney Jim Jagger took on her case instead. Jagger was charismatic and skilled, often winning over jurors. Before proceedings began, while the prosecutor expected what seemed like a straightforward case, he was surprised when Diane gained significant public sympathy early on. The prosecutor, known for his professionalism and strict demeanor, faced a challenging battle against public opinion. Diane amplified this by engaging in bold theatrics in court, once writing "lie" on a notepad and holding it up, only for Jagger to quickly take it from her hands as the prosecutor delivered his opening statement. The prosecutor contended that Diane had planned the murders to remove her children as obstacles to a future with Robert, while a psychiatrist testified that she exhibited traits of antisocial behavior, narcissism, and possible psychopathy. Throughout the trial, Diane's demeanor remained steady, calm, detached, and at times disturbingly cheerful. She was frequently seen laughing with Jagger. Further unsettling observers, Diane revealed a previously untold part of her life during testimony, claiming her father had sexually abused her at age 12, taking her to isolated places and entering her room at night. She described these incidents in detail. Her father forcefully denied the accusations. Diane's mother testified that Diane had been emotional on the night of the shooting, contradicting accounts from doctors and nurses who described her as calm and indifferent. One of the most unforgettable moments of the trial occurred when the prosecution played the song Diane claimed had been playing during the shooting, shocking everyone in the courtroom. Diane hummed along, appearing oblivious to the seriousness of the moment. The most compelling testimony came from Christie herself. Despite her young age and lasting trauma, Christie found the courage to take the stand. She shook and cried frequently, losing her composure whenever Diane looked at her. Yet, she was able to tell the court that her mother had shot her and her siblings before giving herself a superficial wound. Jagger tried to undermine Christie's testimony, claiming she had been coached, but Christie remained steadfast throughout the trial. Diane gave birth to a baby girl and in a television interview stated, "You can't replace children, but you can replace the effect they give you. They give me love, satisfaction, stability, and a reason to live." This comment only intensified public outrage. On June 17th, 1984, Diane was convicted and sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years with a minimum of 25 years before becoming eligible for parole. Steve D.S. deemed unfit as a guardian, lost custody of Christy and Danny. In 1986, the prosecutor and his wife adopted the two children, providing them a stable and loving home to recover from the trauma inflicted by Diane. Diane escaped from the Oregon Women's Correctional Center, remaining on the run for 10 days. A massive manhunt spanning 14 states ended when she was found hiding in the home of a fellow inmate. Following her recapture, the courts added 5 years to her sentence. Diane later appeared on The Oprah Winfrey Show, where the interview became a chaotic display of her personality. She dodged direct questions with long convoluted answers, made sarcastic remarks, and even told inappropriate jokes. Labeled a dangerous offender by the state of Oregon, Diane became eligible for parole hearings every 2 years after serving her initial 25-year minimum. At her first hearing in 2008, she maintained her innocence and insisted on her original story. The district attorney countered by pointing out her inconsistencies and refusal to accept responsibility. Her parole hearings in 2010 and 2020 were also denied despite overwhelming evidence against her. Diane still has a small but vocal group of supporters. Her father publicly backed her until his death in 2017, even offering $100,000 to anyone who could provide evidence proving her innocence. Diane's brother manages a Facebook group called Free Diane DS. Supporters often point to James Clare Haynes, a local man who allegedly bragged about shooting Diane and her children. Affidavit from acquaintances claim Haynes admitted to the crime, but these statements are considered hearsay in court. Although Haynes had a criminal record and a history of violence, no physical evidence ties him to the shootings. Christy and Danny, now adults, have largely kept their lives private, occasionally speaking publicly about their mother. Christy named her daughter after her late sister, Cheryl, to honor her memory. Diane's youngest child, born shortly before her sentencing, was adopted and later named Rebecca, or Becky, as an adult. Becky spoke about discovering the truth of her origins. Though she had always known she was adopted, it wasn't until she tricked a babysitter into revealing information that she began to piece together the full story, which sent her into a downward spiral. She struggled with substance abuse, dropped out of high school, and rebelled against her adoptive family at 21. Feeling lost. At that point, she reached out to Diane for the first time. While their initial interactions were positive, Diane's obsessive and paranoid tendencies soon surfaced. She claimed Becky was being watched as part of a conspiracy and eventually accused her of being complicit. Becky cut off all contact, later expressing deep regret for ever reaching out. Today, Becky has rebuilt her life. She is married, has a family, and has overcome personal challenges, including a battle with lupus. She now runs a non-profit dog breeding business. finding purpose and fulfillment in her work and family. As of 2024, Diane Downs is serving her sentence at the Central California Women's Facility. At 69 years old, she remains one of the most notorious figures in true crime, and it is highly unlikely she will ever be released. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.